I looked up and met her eyes, burning with desire, as she moved with practiced confidence, knowing exactly what she wanted. Time after time, she pulled me in and let me go, immersing me in her warmth and closeness. A playful, almost mysterious smile played on her lips as she guided us both toward the peak of pleasure, and I simply surrendered to her rhythm. I was in heaven. After nearly 10 months, she hadn't given me anything like this. Suddenly her head fell back, droplets of moisture dancing in her hair, and she moaned, "Oh yes, baby, that's it, I'm coming." Her body trembled with waves of sensation, and moments later I felt us both reach the climax together. Spent and soft, she collapsed onto me and whispered, "Wow, that was incredible, probably the best you've ever given me." "See," she added, "you can be an amazing lover when you focus." Yet there was a chill in her tone, more like an order than genuine praise. She kissed me gently on the lips, then sighed and stood up, heading to the bathroom. I watched her walk away, her hips swaying just like when I first saw her swimming laps our junior year. How can someone who enthralls me with her body and touch also be so distant? I wondered. I shook my head and got up as soon as I heard the shower start. Sitting on the toilet, I was lost in thought until she slipped back the curtain and startled me. I jumped. "You scared me," I mumbled, embarrassed. She shrugged and dropped an empty packet into the trash without a word. I frowned. "Why are you doing that?" I asked, confused. She'd always said she liked the reminder of me afterward, so this new habit threw me off. With a sarcastic smile, she tossed her hair back and said, "It's a new day, I want to feel fresh everywhere." Before I could respond, she closed the curtain and began washing her long auburn hair. When she was done, we exchanged a few muted words as I went to rinse off, still reeling from the emotional whirlwind of the last 18 months. I remembered coming home early those many months ago and finding her with her trainer, a huge Norwegian guy named Bjorn. He moved in and out with such force that I felt sick, and her cries sounded nothing like they did with me. I almost ran away. For a moment I even thought of ending my life, but after a long internal battle, I chose to fight for our marriage. I'd never known pain like that before. Thinking I'd gone unseen, I walked back in an hour later to find her in tears on the couch, still wearing her robe. She threw herself into my arms and sobbed, "I never meant for you to see us." It was the first time. Bjorn had been pressuring me for months, and I finally gave in. "Please forgive me. It will never happen again." She sounded so sincere, and she cried for days, even switching gyms while I watched her storm out, slapping him on the way. But despite that Oscar-worthy apology, I realized it marked the beginning of our downward spiral. How could I love someone so fully for 6 years, only to be hurt so deeply? Of course, I reminded myself, men can be cruel too. Within a few weeks, I realized she hadn't stopped seeing him, she was just getting better at hiding it. I pretended I knew nothing, hoping maybe she'd regret it or come to her senses. Instead, my silence only seemed to bolster her confidence. She reveled in my apparent cluelessness. I felt torn between wanting the loving wife I once knew and wondering if she'd ever really cared. I'd already had more hurt than I could handle, and I wasn't sure I could take any more. For 14 months, she'd even enlisted her sister Stephanie as a go-between. Twice a week, Stephanie would show up and chat with me for hours, supposedly to help us work things out. But one night, Stephanie and I followed Callista and discovered she was slipping off to Bjorn's house for training. That morning, I'd scrubbed myself clean in the shower and wrapped a towel around my waist. When I stepped into the bedroom, Callista was already there, dressed to the nines. She wore a little black cocktail dress that left almost nothing to the imagination, especially when she sat down. "Where did you get that dress?" I asked, my throat suddenly dry. She spun around, and I caught a glimpse of a tiny black thong. I swallowed hard. "Oh, Ralphie," she purred, "I bought this just for today, this very special day." Her smile lit up the room as she clicked across the floor in stilettos that showed off her legs. My towel threatened to slip, and she wrapped her arms around my neck as I grabbed it tighter. She leaned in close, brushing against me with a confidence that left me breathless. Then, in a voice that sounded almost playful, she whispered, "After 6 years together, today was probably the last time you'll ever touch me." Her grin turned cold and triumphant as she let go, hair flying, and walked out of the room. I stood there, stunned, towel slipping, as the words echoed in my head. "Callista, what on earth does that mean?" I called after her. I hurried downstairs, my wet feet slipping on the tile, and I landed on my back with a jolt. As I shook off the fall, I saw her in Bjorn's arms at the bottom of the stairs, her big, blonde trainer. Callista looked down at me, eyes flashing with contempt. "You always find a way to embarrass yourself," she sneered. Bjorn just smirked as he held her steady. I pushed myself up and covered my towel as best I could. "Baby, what's happening? You're my wife." She checked her watch and smiled. "Not since 5 minutes ago," she said. Then she added, almost sweetly, "Guess what, dear? We're divorced." Bjorn handed her an envelope, and she sauntered over, brushing it against my cheek like a tease. My heart pounded as I opened it. Inside were papers dated April 21st at noon, irreconcilable differences and a $600,000 settlement. "You took the money from Mom and Dad's estate?" I whispered, shaking. She shrugged. "Oh, and by the way," she said, her voice low, "you signed these when you thought you were handling my insurance forms." I stared at her, feeling completely emptied out. I still hear her voice cutting through the tension. "This is joint property, but now it's mine. If you'd set up a trust, I couldn't touch it. I'm graciously leaving you $400,000, so don't complain. Transfer it into this account." She pressed the paper into my hand, the account details glaring up at me. "You have 20 minutes, she warned, "or I'll have you arrested for breaching the court order. It's right there on page 12. I stood frozen, staring at the woman I thought I knew, unable to find any words. My shoulders slumped as defeat sank in, and I trudged to the phone to authorize the transfer. While the bank put me on hold, I couldn't help but think back over the past 18 months and how crucial this move was for her. Ever since middle school, she'd discovered the power she had over men, especially those who were already married, and she'd never looked back. In high school, she'd become the queen bee by her sophomore year, always at the center of every conversation. I remember how her algebra teacher insisted she sit front and center. She never missed an opportunity to dress provocatively, always keeping her tan perfect. Every guy in school wanted to date her, but she never let anyone take control. She picked and chose at will. After breaking up with her high school boyfriend, she got drunk at a party just after turning 18. Her friend's father, who was supposed to be a trusted adult, comforted her when she cried and walked her to his bedroom. She woke up later disoriented, but she'd had what she called her most intense experience yet. For the next 6 weeks, she let him teach her everything he could, twice or 3 times a week. She learned to master techniques that made any man fall head over heels, and she never held back. Once she felt she'd learned enough, she quietly recorded 3 of their sessions on her phone. Then she confronted him, demanding payment for the trauma she'd endured, threatening to expose the tapes to his wife, family, and church. From December of her senior year until I married her in September after graduation, he paid her $400 a month, over $23,000 in total. I never knew those details until much later, but she wore a satisfied smile whenever she remembered. Bitter about being manipulated by someone she trusted, she spent the rest of high school using her new skills to undermine girls who'd looked down on her. She'd swoop in, steal their boyfriends, then send them back, relishing the sense of power. I watched her as she balanced ambition and desire. Her confidence was intoxicating. Yet beneath it all, I sensed a deep-seated need to control every situation. Now, seeing that paper in my hand, I realized she still held every card. As I authorized the transfer, my heart felt heavier than ever, another part of my past slipping away. When the settlement from my parents' estate finally arrived, Callista was over the moon. It came to just under $1 million, and of course I hadn't put any of it in a trust, so it was all joint property. A few weeks later, she tracked down a shady lawyer through a recommendation from one of Bjorn's other girlfriends. She admitted later that she'd had to encourage him a few times, let's just say over drinks and personal favors, to get him to file in the right county under a fake address. When the divorce papers showed up, I signed for them without a second thought. That evening, she poured me a few beers and, well, made sure I was in a very good mood while I signed what I thought were just updated medical forms. As soon as my pen left the paper, she smiled and told me the last time we'd be intimate, just to make sure I'd hand over the money without calling my lawyer. She laughed that night about her upcoming beach escape in Jamaica, 4 hours away with a cocktail in hand and the sun on her skin. I barely registered her words, lost in the haze of beers and her coaxing. A moment later, I jolted back to reality. Yes, sir, I'm here, I heard myself say into the phone. The bank manager was asking for the account codes. For a heartbeat I hesitated, but Callista's cold stare pushed me on. So I gave him both my code and hers, heart pounding. After hanging up, I turned to her, well, my soon-to-be ex, and said, they'll call back in 5 minutes to verify everything. I started up the stairs but tripped at the top step, and both Callista and Bjorn snickered at my clumsy exit. My cheeks burned as I darted into our bedroom, threw on a shirt and sweatpants, and headed back downstairs. Just outside the door, I overheard Bjorn asking her, "How did you get him to just sign over all that money?" Callista simply smiled and ran her finger along her lips, as if sharing the world's best secret. I knew that if I hit him suddenly, he'd react right away. If I'd let him sit on it, he might have found a way to stall. "Okay," I asked, "but how did you know he'd behave like that?" She smiled, tracing a finger along her glass, and said, "You have to know your opponent's strengths and weaknesses. I know my ex better than he knows himself." Just then, the phone rang, and I caught myself almost losing my balance on the slick tile. Picking it up, I confirmed the transfer, then handed it to Callista. "They want to talk to you," I said. She took the phone, recited her code, hung up, and turned back to me. While we were upstairs, Bjorn loaded my last bag into the car, she said, handing her purse to him. "Go on ahead, baby, I'll be right behind you." Turning back to me, she wrapped her arms around my neck and kissed me once more. Looking straight into my eyes, she delivered her final blow. "You're a good provider and can be a decent lover, but frankly, you're a putz. I want a real man, someone I can respect and who can spoil me the way I deserve. Right now, that's Bjorn." She stepped back, lifted her chin, and walked out like a queen leaving her court. I watched her slide into the Corvette, her legs swinging over the seat so I could see she wasn't wearing that thong anymore. Waving at me, she blew a kiss and shouted as they drove off, "Too bad you lost, but I guarantee you'll never see me again." Bjorn gunned the engine, and they vanished into traffic. I sighed, caught the curious stare of my neighbor across the street, mustered a wave, and then retreated inside with the newspaper in hand. A single tear traced down my cheek. No matter how cruel, she still deserved one. Checking the clock, I realized I needed to cancel tonight's visit with Stephanie and tell her everything. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, disgusted by the tangled sheets still strewn from earlier. Stripping the bed down to the mattress, I threw the old linens and bedspread into the laundry hamper. I remade the bed with fresh sheets, a clean comforter, and new pillowcases, every bit of it reset to blank. Standing back, I asked myself aloud, how long will it take to rebuild my life and find some normalcy again? Picking up the phone, I dialed Stephanie's number. After one ring, a cheerful voice answered, "Hello? Hi Steph, it's Ralph." "Well, hello. Listen, your sister just left." She handed me a set of final divorce papers and took off with her muscle-headed boyfriend. "It's over." "I'm so sorry, Ralph." "Yay. Listen, Ralph, I'll come over for a bit, okay? It sounds like you could use some company." "Yay, I think I do need some company." He waited for her to hang up her phone before following suit. He walked downstairs and headed to the kitchen. Retrieving a beer, he continued into the living room, still not fully comprehending what has just happened. The emotions he felt were numbing his senses. Sitting in his overstuffed chair staring into space, he was brought back to the present by an ever so light knock on the front door. "Come in," Ralph called out. A young woman in her early 20s peeked around the corner of his living room. She had shoulder-length light brown hair, and an almost boyish figure. Granted, she didn't have the perfectly toned body as Callista's, but it actually made her appear smaller than she was. Wearing her trademark polo shirt and jeans, Steph was more into function than form, unlike her older sibling. She smiled when Ralph said, "Hi little lady." Running over to Ralph sitting in his chair, she crawled onto his lap and straddled his legs. "I am not little, besides Daddy used to say the best things come in small packages." Pressing her hungry mouth down on his, she began to probe his mouth with her tongue. Scooting forward in the chair, he stood up, wrapping his arms under her legs for support and to keep her in place as she wrapped her legs around his body. Making his way into the bedroom, he knelt on the bed and laid her back onto the bed while still locked between her legs. "Hey lover, how did you finally get her to take the last step? We have been waiting for this for so long," he asked. Ralph thought about how Stephanie had first been a sounding board for him and had tried to gently maneuver Callista back to him. When the final settlement of his parents' estate had come in, he had been shocked they had left him over $7 million after all the outstanding debts had been paid. Better yet, $6 million was in a blind trust that he alone knew about, and when Callista had suddenly become so excited when she found out he was worth right at $1 million, it had been pretty evident where she was heading, even if the bimbo thought he was naive to her plans. His lawyer watched the court filings for the surrounding counties and found the courthouse where Callista had filed the divorce papers. His lawyer waited until she played the game with the divorce papers signing and quietly had her lawyer investigated. Faced with the problems of a fraudulent legal action that could lead to disbarment, he turned state's evidence and the police sting went into full action. Callista headed downtown to privately send her money to whatever bank she had set herself up with, only all his money remained locked up tightly in his accounts, an account he removed her from a week earlier. With the police listening devices in place in the house, they had picked up the confession about tricking him into signing the papers as well as her admission to Bjorn about her planning the money sting. When Ralph called the bank, he had talked with the police detectives, not the bank manager. Therefore, when Callista walked into the bank in her blithe manner thinking she was now fancy-free, they arrested her on the spot along with Bjorn. Bjorn would be given a chance for a deal, turn on his lover, and he would get to stay in the USA, being he was a foreign national, or if he stuck with his tight little piece of ass, he would be deported after his jail time. Callista would get jail time and a chance to sign the real divorce papers, where Ralph would take all the bills. She would get $10,000 for every year of their marriage, which he held in an account for her until she got out of the slammer, only the total would be $50,000, not the $600,000 she was scheming for. If she refused, Ralph would sue her and get his divorce, and his ex-wife would get no money. It was going to crush Callista to find out the putz was not only pretty aware of what went on in his life, but can play hardball when he wanted to, and he would get Stephanie, the perfect girl, and her younger sister in the end also. Stephanie smiled as she answered him, "Truthfully, all I used was my knowledge of her. You have to know your adversary well enough to use both their strengths and weaknesses against them. She taught me that. Trust me, lover, I know my older sister like the back of my hand, maybe even better than she knows herself. I've been playing with that bimbo's head for years. This time I finished the game set match. She used to steal my boyfriends in high school and college just to see me cry. I've known I was in love with you for the last year. When I understood what she was doing to you, I knew I could be yours, and you could be mine, and justice be done." "Oh," Ralph whispered as he looked at Stephanie and smiled. Recognizing that special look she had that meant she was his for the taking, he couldn't help but smile. He had watched that look in her eyes for almost 14 months as they shared one other, and now they would share it with each other for the rest of their lives.